Welcome to WOW 11, the very last day of WOW. And today's webinar is applying condition monitoring technologies that detect failure modes in your plant, presented by Scott Mohr. Well, hi, Scott. How are you?
Joining here this afternoon.
Yes, thank you. We are excited you are here. Just a quick note to everybody, this webinar is being recorded and you will be emailed a link to the access to the on-demand version of this webinar tomorrow. And Scott will be sticking around today for some of your questions. So if you do have any questions during our chat time here today, please go ahead and enter them in the question panel and we will have Scott answer them live. All right, Scott, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and pass things over to you now.
Very good. Thank you, Paige. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Appreciate you taking the time out of your, I'm sure, very busy schedules here to join me today to talk about the topic that Paige had mentioned. So, Paige, if you can go to the next slide, that would be great. And I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself here first. I'm a strategic account executive with Allied Reliability. And I'm going to spare you the rest of the details because I know we got started late here and I know everybody's busy. So, but again, I appreciate you joining. We're going to talk about the topic of applying condition monitoring technologies that detect failure modes in your plant, right? Paige, if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. So over the course of the next, we're going to be covering quite a few topics. We're going to talk about defining a maintenance strategy. What is it? What are the key elements of a maintenance strategy that makes it effective? We're going to talk about condition monitoring as the cornerstone of a proactive maintenance strategy and why. We'll review the top 5 condition monitoring technologies and, more importantly, and with the focus on what failure mode identification capability the technologies have. We'll review designing and implementing a proactive maintenance strategy. From there, I'll share some maintenance strategy examples from the tire manufacturing industry and some key critical assets. And then we'll do a quick review of the elements of the best practice CBM program and wrap up with a quick review of the proactive workflow model and most importantly, how condition monitoring is really the enabler and leveler, enabler and provides the capability to drive a proactive maintenance strategy. So I'm going to ask that Paige, if you can kill the camera for me if it hasn't already been done, so everybody can focus on it. That'd be great.
Yep, everybody can see just the full screen, so you're all good.
All right, perfect. So we're going to begin with defining a maintenance strategy. What is it, right? A well-defined asset maintenance strategy is always a critical component of any manufacturing facility management and risk mitigation strategy. Excuse me, let me take a drink here. And a well-defined asset management strategy really has 3 key components. The first one and most important is that it's failure mode based. If you have a maintenance strategy in place today that's not failure mode based, I'm pretty confident it's most likely effective. A well-defined asset management strategy also has the appropriate defect detection and mitigation strategies defined and in place to efficiently identify failure modes in advance before unplanned failure occurs. And it also enables the ability to efficiently address the identified failure modes in a proactive manner with the intent of preventing costly unplanned failures. That's what everybody's after. So if I've done my job here correctly, as we walk through this, at the end of this next 45 minutes or so, there'll be a good understanding of why condition monitoring is really the cornerstone of a well-defined proactive maintenance strategy. Next slide. So I think it's important to begin here and talk about failure patterns. Failure patterns were identified and understood back in the late 1950s, and this has been discussed and reviewed in the reliability world now for many, many years, obviously. But there are 6. It was identified there are 6 key distinctive failure patterns in which components fail in a manufacturing facility, and these 6 failure patterns are broken into really 2 categories. One is age related, and the second one is random. So on the left-hand side, you can see that age-related failure patterns, bathtub curve, wear out curve, fatigue curve, are specifically age-related, and a very small percentage of equipment failures fall into this category. On the right-hand side are random failures. These failures or failure curves are initial break-in period, random, and infant mortality. And you'll notice that the vast majority, in this case, 89% of failures that occur in industrial facilities are random in nature, right? And, I've been asked this many times. We talk about the failure patterns being defined and understood back in the 1950s. And these percentages, these studies have been duplicated multiple times over the years in industrial environments. And although the actual numbers and percentages of each category vary a little bit, they remain in the same category, right? The key takeaway here is that most equipment failures that occur in industrial facilities are random in nature. So when you think about that historically, and what I've seen in my 35 plus years in industry and maintenance and reliability for a good portion of that, is that many maintenance strategies, most of them are heavily designed around time-based maintenance strategies, and you have to ask the question, how effective really are they, right? Well, one would think somewhere around below 10-11%. Right. So it's important to understand failure patterns as you're designing a maintenance strategy, because that really is a key enabler to pick the correct strategy. Next slide, please. So what is condition monitoring? Condition monitoring is the application of condition monitoring technologies, statistical process control, or equipment performance for the purpose of early detection and elimination of equipment defects. And of course, the purpose there is to identify and eliminate these defects before unplanned downtime occurs, creating unnecessary expenditures. Condition monitoring is also known as predictive maintenance. It's also called condition-based maintenance. All three of them are used synonymously. And I think you'll see that throughout this presentation as well. So next slide, please. So how does condition monitoring work? Right. This is a diagram here that's been out in industry for many years. It's called the PDF curve, and I bet many people on this call have seen this before. On the left hand or the y-axis, you have equipment condition. On the x-axis, you have continuum of time. What this diagram represents is the life cycle of a failure that's occurring in a piece of equipment or a component in a plant. Right. The top left red dot is the point in which a failure starts to occur, right? And if left to its own devices, as it goes through its life cycle, it's going to degrade and continue to degrade to a point of failure, right? And when it fails, it's going to fail catastrophically, again, if left to its own devices and no corrective action takes place. So as you look at the PDF curve, condition monitoring technologies have been out in industry and in use for many years, and the technology has gotten better and better over the years too. They are capable of identifying mechanical and electrical failure modes very early in the life cycle of a failure, which is the top of the PDF curve, identified as early signal 1, 2, and 3. The difference between those signals are really the type of technologies you're using. Some are more apt and capable of identifying failures earlier than others. But at the same time, too, that can shift a little bit depending upon the failure that's occurring and the conditions at the time as well. So, that's the fit for condition monitoring. As you go further down the life cycle to the right-hand side where you see audible noise and hot to touch, that's really condition monitoring by human senses. And human senses are a perfectly acceptable condition monitoring tool. It's just you need to understand some of the deficiencies there, and that's further down the PDF curve. Right. And as you see on the bottom, that continuation of time to the point of failure, it gives you less time, right, to be able to react and address corrective action before failure occurs. Right. The other key point here in this concept is that it's a known fact that the cost of repair of a catastrophic failure can be 6 to 10 times higher than the cost of repair and corrective action for early defined and detected defect that's corrected in a planned and scheduled fashion, right? So that's where condition monitoring really enables an effective maintenance strategy, minimizing risk and reducing cost. Next slide, please. So what's the most immediate benefit of condition monitoring as your cornerstone? It's time. I'll just talk about it. It gives you identify the defect early. It gives you time, and your maintenance planning department's time to actually plan and schedule that work, and then the trades be able to execute that work and make corrective actions before unplanned failure occurs. Right. Next slide, please. This is another view of the PDF curve, but it's overlaid and organized in like work priorities. I'm sure everybody's familiar with those, right? On the top, at the top in the blue and the yellowish, priority 4 and 5, at the top of the PDF curve. You can see, the diagram shows ultrasonic energy and vibration oil analysis as examples of condition monitoring technologies, detecting defects in your equipment very early in the life cycle of failure. We call that the predictive zone. And those are typically, as it shows, priorities 4 and 5. You have more time to plan, schedule, and execute the corrective work before failure. As you move further down the curve to priority 2 and 3, you're in the preventative maintenance zone or preventative zone. Again, that's where your human senses come into play, right? Again, a perfectly acceptable strategy. That's the area where I call the multiple S's, right? Stinking, shaking, smelling, smoking. It says audible noise, mechanical looseness, those kind of things, right? And then those are typically a priority 2 or 3, right? You have less time for the planning, scheduling, and execution before failure occurs. And then you get into the priority 1 zone where failure is either imminent or you already have catastrophic failure. That's the run to failure zone, right? Of course, everybody wants to work in the priority 4 and 5 zones, that predictive zone with the appropriate mix of the preventative zone in priority 2 and 3. Next slide, please. So what are the big 5 condition monitoring technologies? Vibration analysis first. And if you can just click through, there we go. The next one is ultrasound or ultrasonic analysis, and oil analysis, infrared thermography, and motor circuit analysis. And there's also other technologies out there. As an example, excuse me, I had to take a quick drink. Electrical systems or electrical signature analysis has been out there and in use for many years to look at the health of the electrical power and electrical signature of your incoming power. And that's also being used to now, and as an emerging technology, to be able to identify and detect many mechanical failure modes as well throughout the entire drivetrain and even into the process. So, but we're not gonna focus on that here today. Next slide. So the value and the benefit of condition monitoring technologies. We talked about time. I don't think I need to put any more emphasis there. There's 3 other key benefits, thank you, and values associated with condition monitoring technologies. If you're applying a good condition monitoring technology application across your asset base, then typically the time-based PMs that are in place, many, as what I've seen, are ineffective, right? They're generally vague. Example would be inspect motor, okay? And I've seen that, I don't know how many, countless of times. Inspect motor for what? They don't generally specify very many specific failure modes for a motor, so execution can be by different individuals can be extremely variable, and your output of inspections the same result, right? And you still wind up having failures as well. So, you can eliminate those non-value added time-based preventative maintenance activities, and that creates the third value and benefit, and that's more time for skilled trades. So you can utilize their labor doing more higher value added work. And again, as I mentioned as well, it's a key enabler, right, to reduce overall cost of maintenance if it's utilized, if it's implemented, and it's utilized appropriately as your maintenance strategy. Next slide, please. So after saying all that, what's the real purpose of PDM or condition monitoring? Next click, please. So the real purpose of condition monitoring is to assist in the identification and elimination of root causes of machinery defects. right? If you catch the defects early and you take corrective action early in the life cycle of a defect that's occurring, then you can preserve the evidence and you can really understand what the potential root causes of that failure were, such as maybe it's a spalling in a bearing, right? So if it goes later in the P-DEF curve and even to a catastrophic failure, typically your evidence is gone. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to identify root cause, right? So it can be a real solid enabler to your root cause analysis program and improving and mitigating equipment failures in your plant. Next slide. So what are the top 5 condition monitoring technologies and the failure mode detection capabilities? I'm going to move very quickly through this because there's a lot of information. Be prepared. So vibration analysis. Vibration analysis, again, has been used for many, many years. It can be used in a route-based and or connected environment. Route-based typically done on a monthly basis, where you have an accelerometer and data collector, and you walk a route and collect data on your rotating assets. Connected solutions are able to monitor these assets on a continuous basis or a much higher frequency, every shift, every day, once a week, et cetera, right? Next slide, please. Okay. So vibration analysis has the ability to detect many failure modes in rotating assets. I'm not going to go through all of these, but some key ones that I see on a very routine basis, imbalance, misalignment, bearing looseness, gear wear, chain wear and looseness, rolling element bearing defects, and the actual failure modes associated with them, gear misalignment, belt wear and looseness, sheave run out. And vibration is also able to detect many electrical problems as well. So it's a very effective condition monitoring technology to be utilized. Next slide, please. Ultrasonic analysis, used widely. It has the ability to detect what we call airborne defects, also mechanical defects and electrical defects, right? Next slide, please. With respect to airborne, leak detection is a huge use for ultrasound. It is used widely for the detection of air leaks in the plant and steam leaks as well. And you can use it for any other compressed gas as well, oxygen, hydrogen. It can detect defects or failure modes in heat exchangers and tanks and pipes and valves and steam traps, right? It's commonly used to identify if a steam trap is functioning correctly. So the other key thing here is that, using ultrasonic detection for steam and air leaks can prove to be very beneficial for any organization. Generally, all plants have leaks. I've been in plants where their leaks are so abundant that sometimes you can't hear, right? That's the pretty obvious stuff. But organizations that I've seen that effectively implement ultrasound can identify leaks throughout the entire plant. And if they're acting on these, it can contribute to significant cost savings, and for that matter, even capacity increases in the plant. I've seen organizations actually eliminate air compressors, right, by correcting air leaks as well. So there's also another contributor there too, and that's greenhouse gas emissions, right? When you have leaks in the plant, pieces of equipment have to work harder, consumes more energy to compensate for the leakage in air or steam or other compressed gases. And by correcting that, you reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gases. So it contributes to many of the ESG, corporate ESG objectives that are out there today. So it generally pays for itself tenfold. Next slide, please. Ultrasound is effective in mechanical, identifying mechanical failure modes, bearing defects, gear mesh problems, the operation of valve and steam traps, as I mentioned, hydraulic valve and cylinder operation. One thing I want to point out here is that ultrasound is very effective for identifying bearing defects. The difference between ultrasound and vibration is that ultrasound cannot tell you the failure mode, the specific failure mode of the defect, whereas vibration can with the appropriate information. Ultrasound can only tell you that you have an elevated friction coefficient in the bearing, which translates into sound, which translates into decibels and hertz. And ultrasound is focused on those sound waves in hertz above 20,000 hertz, right? Beyond what the human ear can detect. So that's the lever for early defect detection. Next slide. Ultrasound is also very effective in identifying electrical failure modes. It is a key tool used in many plants for safety concerns, right? As standard practice, ultrasound is used around electrical panel doors before opening the doors because it has the capability of identifying arcing, tracking, and corona. And of course, those are major contributors to potential of arc flash when you open the panel doors, right? So significant contributor to improved safety performance and reduction of human injuries and even potentially fatalities. But it's able to identify these defects across a multitude of electrical components. Next slide. Oil analysis used widely also in industry. Oil analysis is a complementary condition monitoring technology as well as a standalone. Go to the next slide, please. There are many different tests that oil analysis is used for failure mode detection, but the three key tests are really to test the chemical condition of the lubricant, things like oxidization, nitration, acid levels, et cetera. And all of those, if they're out of balance, can contribute to the lubricant not being able to perform its function of maintaining a boundary between mechanical components, right? And eliminating that friction. The next one is determining condition of parts the lubricant is serving, right? Wear particle analysis is a key and standard test with oil analysis, and it can determine ferrous and non-ferrous metal particles that exist in your oil. And that tells you if there is some mechanical component that is breaking down as well. And the other nice thing about it is through a microscope, you can look at the shape of the actual particles, and it can help you understand what the potential failure modes of that failure is as well. It's also a complementary technology to vibration. If you have elevated vibration in an asset and say a gearbox that has a lubricant, you can look at oil analysis trends as well, and they go hand in hand to help understand what the actual failure mode is that's occurring in what component, right? So it helps in that investigative process as well before corrective action takes place. And then last but not least, what people generally most highly associate oil analysis to, and that's the presence of concentration of contaminants, right? Water, dirt, sand, fiber, right? Those are all contaminants in the oil that can from a micron size be much larger than the boundary, the lubricant boundary, that film that is created in between mechanical components, and cause wear and friction, right? And create your equipment to fail quickly at a increased rate. Next slide, please. Infrared analysis is used widely as well. Infrared is very effective on mechanical components as well as electrical components. And infrared, I think everybody understands the basis of infrared. It's looking at temperature variation and to light components and the environmental conditions as well. Next slide, please. Thermography is a very capable tool in identifying elevated temperatures and bearings, motors, gearboxes, mechanical seals, etc. The thing to understand with thermography is that typically thermography, it identifies these failure modes later in the PDF curve. So just need to understand that when you're using it, but it's also a very effective tool from a speed perspective. You can walk through a plant with an IR camera and look at bearings on, say, a conveyor, and be able to identify if you have hot spots that need to be addressed in a very efficient manner. So it has its place in that space as well. Next slide, please. Same premise on the electrical side. Temperature variation between light components, etc. And if you could go to the next slide, The pictures show a pretty good understanding of the type of electrical components where failures can be detected, right? Utility feeds, transformer insulation connections or insulator connections, connections in switch gears, bus ducts, motor circuits or MCCs, etc. So used widely to be able to identify if there are hot spots in electrical systems that can cause failure and downtime. It's also capable of detecting low voltage applications in certain situations as well. Next slide, please. And the one thing I didn't mention was IR is also very effective in product and process failure mode identification. This is just some examples of, like, top right is a tank. You can see a tank level of fluid. On the left-hand side, insulation breakdown in a furnace, right? Hot spots in a furnace. And on the bottom is showing, the operation of a steam trap, if it's functioning correctly or not. Next slide, please. Motor circuit analysis is also very, very capable technology for identifying defects in electrical circuits and motors. There's two tests normally performed. That's offline and motor circuit analysis, and then online, right? On the offline detection capability, we see its capability across many defects. Next slide, please. Offline can detect, dynamic and static eccentricity, right? It can detect many faults in the stators, right? Phase to phase, phase to ground, turn to turn, etc. So it's very effective in that space. Next slide. On conductors and insulation, again, phase to phase, phase to ground, right? Contamination, loose connections, rotor faults, broken, cracked, or open rotor bars, and voids and castings, right? Next slide. And also to mention, motor circuit analysis offline means that the motor is not energized. You're typically connecting the MCA test equipment right to the leads within the motor junction box, or referred to as the pecker head, right? So, and then you go to motor circuit analysis online. Online is when the circuit is fully energized. You're collecting your data from your MCC connections there, and you're actually looking at the entire circuit all the way through the motor and even beyond. Next slide, please. The defect detection capability here again is pretty broad. Stator faults, loose windings, winding shorts, loose connections, rotor faults again, broken, cracked, or open rotor bars, voids and castings, just like offline. Dynamic, static eccentricity as well, just like offline. Next slide, please. And all the way through the power circuit, as I mentioned, right? Current and voltage imbalance, failure modes. It's able to connect failed or detect failed power factor capacitors, provide harmonic distortion, and understand if there's an issue there. On the mechanical side, power transmissions, gearing, potential mechanical issues in gearing, vanes and blades, and also, interestingly enough, operational events, right? Whatever, in any one of those mechanical systems and or process systems that create enough, let's call it tension or disturbance in the electrical system, can be picked up through MCA, right? Next slide, please. Do I still have you? Next slide. There we go. So the key takeaways here on this first section is, a well-defined maintenance strategy is failure mode based, failure mode based, failure mode based. It also has the appropriate detection and mitigation strategy defined and in place to efficiently identify failure modes in advance and provide the ability to execute proactive corrective action efficiently and effectively, of course, before unplanned failure occurs. All the condition monitoring technologies are capable and highly effective in identifying a significant quantity of electrical and mechanical failure modes early in the PDAF curve in your equipment in your plant. And again, condition monitoring is the cornerstone of a well-defined maintenance strategy. So to prime us up for the next section here to come is, reliability begins with an absolute clear understanding of equipment failure modes and a well-defined maintenance strategy included to detect and proactively mitigate them before unplanned failure occurs, right? That's how you eliminate risk and reduce cost within an organization. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into designing and implementing a proactive maintenance strategy with condition monitoring as a cornerstone. Next slide, please. I think it's appropriate to start with first an understanding of the definition of a failure mode. There are two specific ways failure modes are defined. The first one is a functional failure. A functional failure is the way in which an asset fails to fulfill its engineered or desired functions, right? A motor stops transmitting torque, or a bearing stops turning, or an electrical contact stops conducting electrical current. That's a functional failure. Now, what goes in conjunction with that is a failure mode. It's the failure mode that creates the functional failure. And that functional failure mode is defined as the part plus the problem plus the reason that caused the failure in a failure mode statement, right? So the part is a group of pieces that make up the component: the impeller, the shaft, the bolt, the nut, the bearing. The problem is what's wrong with the part, right? This really refers to the effect of the failure mechanism. Well, the bearing seized, or the hydraulic valve has erosion or corrosion, right? A mechanical switch has fatigued and broken, or an electrical contact is burnt, right? Now the next step is the reason. That's the physical cause of the problem. It's age. And now I'll tie this back to your failure patterns. That is age related. Improper lubrication. Improper lubrication is a random failure. Misalignment and imbalance. Now, let's start with misalignment first. Misalignment is a random failure as well, potentially. Imbalance can be a random failure, and improper installation can be a random failure. Now, it's specifically related to the failure curve of infant mortality, right? So a failure mode expressed as a statement. Here's a very quick, down dirty, easy example. Bearing seized due to lack of lubrication. It's very important to understand the failure modes because the failure modes define your maintenance strategy, but also the failure modes are used from a root cause analysis perspective to understand what corrective action needs to take place in either your procedures, your processes, your training, or your maintenance strategy to either mitigate or eliminate that failure from occurring ever again in the future, right? Next slide, please. Excuse me a minute while I wet my whistle. So how do you define equipment maintenance plan? Equipment maintenance plan is another term for asset management strategy. There's 4 key elements here. And the first one really is to understand the equipment that that needs to be maintained, right? That information comes either from a customer CMMS data in their asset hierarchy, along with BOM data to understand the component makeup of the assets, which is required. And if you don't have that, then there's the process of asset walkdown to create that information is required. From there, you need a criticality analysis. And the criticality analysis is a determination of a relative ranking, right, of the importance of that equipment, system, et cetera, to the organization. Customers have that information, or many do. If not, that's something that needs to be created as well. Next one is performing a failure mode analysis. Now we get to the failure mode based asset maintenance strategies. That's a documented understanding of the conditions that exist that will cause that functional failure, right? That functional failures are created by failure modes. So there's quite a few ways to do this. Traditionally, there's a FMEA or failure mode effects analysis. The challenge there is that if you have a large quantity of assets to either optimize a maintenance strategy or create a new one. That's a long, drawn out, arduous process, right? There are automated tools. Allied has an automated tool that automates that entire function so that you can get through an entire asset base of high quantity in a very quick, efficient way to develop what the output is. And that's the fourth element. And that's the equipment maintenance plan. That's the strategy identifying what activity is going to take place to minimize equipment reliability or maximize equipment reliability and availability, right? And again, there's tools out there that's a automated output of the EMP development process, right? So let me show you on the next slide how that all kind of comes together. So again, equipment maintenance strategies, they're based on defined failure modes, right? Allied's EMP tool has a comprehensive failure mode library. We've got over 3 million cataloged assets with their failure modes defined, associated with those assets. Those are inherent failure modes. And the process really begins with understanding your equipment, right? What makes it unique? And on the bottom right of this slide is an example of what I'm going to describe. You need to understand what your asset types are that exist in your plant, and also need to understand the component makeup of those asset types. Once you understand that, then behind the scenes, the Allied EMP tool aligns the asset and the components directly to a failure mode from that failure mode's library, the part, the problem, and the reason. Then it maps that failure mode to an appropriate and applicable condition monitoring detection technology. And where those failure modes cannot be defined or identified through condition monitoring, then a PM inspection or mitigating strategy needs to be defined, right, and put into and included into your asset management strategy as well. Next slide, please. This right here is kind of a blow up of the last slide. I don't know if you can actually see this any better, but this is an example of a rubber mixer. You've got a rubber mixer, and in that rubber mixer, there's a gear set. As one example, this is just one example from one component, and then it maps out the problems and the reasons from our failure mode library, and then mapping again to the appropriate condition monitoring technologies. And in this example for a rubber mixer, 3 condition monitoring technologies are required, right, to cover all the failure modes in this highly critical piece of equipment in the tire manufacturing industry. That's vibration, infrared, and oil analysis. So a key note I'll make here is that I see a lot of organizations as they want to start condition monitoring, that they pick a technology that is easy. I believe it's easy, it's easily trainable, etc. And they go out and they deploy, right? Not necessarily on a failure modes based application. And what happens is especially on key critical assets, is there are many failure modes that aren't covered. So you induce risk, and you just need to understand that, right? It induces risk to the organization and potential for catastrophic failures, right? Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about how you deploy. Deployment happens, now we get into the importance of criticality analysis. Deployment is performed based on criticality of an asset. That's a relative numerical ranking of assets' importance to the organization based on a lot of key organizational factors, right? It's shown. There's 5 shown here. Safety. If a failure occurs and it potentially can cause death, dismemberment, that's going to be an absolutely high critical asset or failure mode within that asset. If there's no impact whatsoever, then it's going to be low. From an environmental standpoint, same thing. If that failure is going to cause a environmental spill that contaminates the ocean, then it's going to be extremely, it's going to be a high critical asset. And then inversely, if there's no environmental impact, it's going to be low critical. And then it's kind of the same process for maintenance: cost, quality, process, and throughputs. And there may be some other categories that are important to an organization as well, right? But this relative ranking criticality analysis of your asset base included in the maintenance strategy is important, because this is how you deploy your condition monitoring program. So there's an approach that's referred to as the quartile coverage model. And what this model does is it takes your total asset listing based on your criticality, breaks them into 4 sections. Those 4 sections are defined by criticality cutoffs from highest critical to lowest. And you use this quartile coverage to deploy your condition monitoring strategies in maintenance strategy in a stepped approach. You start with the highest critical assets, and the highest critical assets in the quartile coverage model actually is the 4th quartile. And you deploy all of your condition monitoring technologies to address all of your failure modes in those high critical assets. And when your program reaches a level of consistent performance in areas such as route compliance, your ability, we call mean time to implement, but ability to, after a defect is identified, to plan, schedule, and execute that work in a timely fashion, right? And you can consistently repeat that performance, then you go to the next quartile level and you grow your program into your 3rd quartile. And you do the same thing all the way down through the 1st quartile coverage to get to your full coverage model. It's also important to note too that as you progress in your quartile coverage, your 4th quartile, which is your most critical assets, are going to deploy and should deploy all the condition monitoring technology so that all of your failure modes are fully covered. As you progress down past into the 3rd and 4th quartile coverage, you'll start shedding, if you will, technologies across failure modes. And at that point, you're using less technologies on the lower critical assets, right? And these are all of these decision points are defined at the very beginning of your equipment, your EMP, your equipment maintenance plan development, criticality cutoffs, technologies to be deployed, and so on, right? But this is a good strategy for deploying your condition monitoring program across your industrial facility. Next slide, please. So this is an example of an equipment maintenance plan. Again, it uses the hierarchy, criticality analysis, and the EMP or maintenance strategy output. And what it provides you with is a summary of your maintenance strategy by asset. So in this example here, it's an air handling unit. It's got a criticality of 486 and a middle of the road on a 0 to 1,000 scale. And then down below, it provides you with the detail of what is the maintenance strategy for that asset, right? You have infrared applied on a 180-day basis, which is 6 months. Ultrasound applied quarterly in 90 days. Vibration every monthly. Infrared mechanical is used quarterly. And then there's 2 preventative maintenance activities associated here. I think it's 90 days, struggling to see it, but and then there's some operator care activities on a weekly basis as well, right? And then there's some lubrication tasks. And EMP also provides line of sight to how much time is estimated that activity is going to take place, or those inspections are going to take place. And then it also sums it up over 52 weeks, so you can see the labor requirements for an asset needed, right, over a year. And you do that across all your asset base with this information. You can get a clear understanding of labor requirements and so on to execute the maintenance strategy, right, as well. Next slide, please. This is also an example of an EMP, but it's focused on condition monitoring technologies. This is an example of a twin 2 calendar. As you can see from left to right, you've got criticality of the asset. In this case, we're in the 800s. It provides CMMS number, equipment descriptions, and then your hierarchical description across. And then over on level 7 or the level set, the number 7 column is the component. And as you move forward to the right, or more to the right, it identifies what strategies are going to be deployed, and then in what frequency. So on the first row with this gearbox, it's got a lubrication activity every 7 days. It's got vibration on 1 day / 30 days. 1 day is would indicate that that's a connected solution, and the data or the trend data is reviewed on that connected solution every 30 days. That does not mean that on a connected solution that you ignore it for 30 days, right? There are alarm limits and notifications that come out automatically. If an alarm limit or limit is tripped, then at that point an analyst would look at that immediately when it occurs, right? But every 30 days, you go back and look at the trend data to see if it's going up, going down, or staying the same, right? And so on. It walks all the way down through this. So this gives you, a very easy to follow list of your condition monitoring and lubrication activities and inspections that are to take place at the component level across your entire asset base, organized by asset. This would be a key tool used for organizing your quartile coverage model and tracking your deployment of that coverage model across your asset base. Next slide, please. So here's an example. This is a typical manufacturing strategy in a tire manufacturing industry. We've been working in tire industry now for well over a decade. And, what we have seen and created, right, across critical assets is shown here. So on the left-hand side, Banbury mixing line typically has about 4,200 inherent failure modes, a rubber mill 850, and a curing press 550 to 1,200. And the variance there would be the type of loaders that are used on a curing press, right? As you move to the right, the same critical assets, a mixing line, you can see the maintenance strategy mix. On a mixing line across those 4,200 inherent failure modes, typically 37% are identifiable through some form of condition monitoring technology, which is broken out below. In this case, out of that 37%, that quantity of failure modes, vibration covers 100 or 1,110, which represents 36% of that population. Electrical IR, 850 or 815 failure modes, 26% of the population, and so on down through the technologies. So you can see that mix of the technologies applied to the failure modes for a mixing line, right? Back to the mixer, PM inspection is 62% of your failure modes, and run to failure, which is a perfectly acceptable strategy, 1%. I will put the caveat of run to failure. You would have a mitigation strategy to be able to return that component or asset to service in some reasonable period of time associated with run to failure modes. So on a rubber mill, same kind of pattern, 38% condition monitoring technologies or failure modes covered by condition monitoring technologies, 60% PM inspections, 2% run to failure. And then on curing press, 14% condition monitoring and 84% PM inspections, and the rest run to failure. So it gives you a good idea of the overall mix between condition monitoring and PM inspections applied in a tire manufacturing environment, at least on these critical assets, right? Again, I bring a point back home that if you're only using one or two select condition monitoring technologies, you need to understand that there's many other failure modes that may not be covered, and it increases potential risk to your organization, right? So a well-designed maintenance strategy has the appropriate mix of condition monitoring, preventive maintenance inspections, and it's there to optimize resources and capabilities, and it's able to detect and prevent failure modes from shutting down your manufacturing process, right? That's what we're after, right? Okay, next slide. The key takeaways here. A fully comprehensive maintenance strategy is designed based on failure modes existing in your asset base, right? Condition monitoring technology selection and deployment is also based on the design and maintenance strategy. There should be a structured approach there. Partial technology deployment, as I mentioned multiple times, would create gaps in proactive failure mode detection, inducing risk to the organization. And condition monitoring program deployment is based on the asset criticality. That's the quartile coverage model that I mentioned. And then the development of a maintenance strategy is done in a stepped approach. It's deployment, not development. On a stepped approach, based on the quartile coverage model, right? So key point here is reliability begins with that clear understanding of the equipment failure modes, and then a well-defined maintenance strategy associated with those failure modes to detect and proactively mitigate them before unplanned failure occurs. Next slide, please. I feel it also beneficial too, just as we're talking about maintenance strategy deployment, just some highlights here on keys to implementation, right? Determine the starting point utilizing the quartile coverage model approach. Determine who and how tasks will be performed, right? Are you going to execute condition monitoring technology inspections on a route base, or is it going to be a connected system or a combination of both, right? Are you going to use internal or external resources, or are you going to use a hybrid combination of both, right? Make those decisions up front. Prioritize the effort across the organization. Develop and adhere to standards. Develop your standards for technologies and how you collect data, what your alarming standards are, how are you going to report those defects, and so on, and then adhere to them through the execution of your program. Manage by measuring. Case with everything, right? Manage by measuring. Make sure you've got good program KPIs that tell you the status of the program. Are you improving? Are you not? Are you, etc. Provide training. Include those training requirements in your individual development plans, and then also ensure sustainable results through a regimented governance process. Things like as you're going through implementation on a weekly basis, how's implementation going? What's the status? What's the progress? On a monthly basis, perform site KPI reviews during the life of the overall program. Again, it's to understand the health of the program and the value driven from the program. And then on a quarterly basis, a corporate level KPI review, again, during the overall life of the program. All of these things will help drive and lead you to a sustainable program that delivers the benefits you're after. That's improved asset reliability, leading to improved throughput at a lower overall cost to the organization. Next slide, please. So I think this is a valuable a slide to show. This is considered to be the gold standard on a PDM program. And it helps you understand, what that vision is, where are the targets, what are you shooting for as you implement and manage a PDM program. So the first coverage model, the 2Q means second quartile coverage, 3T means 3 technologies, and the 15% means that 15% of your overall labor hours are utilized in the execution of an inspection using condition monitoring technologies, right? That's a good standard to shoot for to start with, right? Then you go into performance of the overall program, route compliance. Route compliance targets of greater than 90%. Condition monitoring technologies won't do you any good if you're not constantly, meeting your route compliance needs and your inspection frequencies to tell you the health of the asset and the failure modes as well. So, route compliance is calculated by the total number of assets that are on route divided by the total pieces of equipment. The 720 is the total number of assets that were inspected divided by the total number of pieces in your condition monitoring program. So in this case, 720 divided by 800, 90%, right? So 90% is your minimum target. You're also looking for those PDM inspections to drive 35% of your labor hours through the results of your PDM inspections. That's identifying failure modes in your equipment that could shut you down. Right. So again, the calculation is we spent 350 hours on corrective work driven from the CVM program, and we had 1,000 hours available. 35%. That's your target. Mean time to implement, very important. Again, if your condition monitoring program is in place, and you're identifying defects, but you're not acting on them in a reasonable time, then again, you're increasing risk. In some cases, significantly to the organization. So you target less than 45 days. For mean time to implement. That's from the point of defect identification through corrective action completion. And then have a good QA/QC process in place. You take corrective action on an identified defect. Have a process in place to go back using the same technologies to verify and validate that failure mode has been removed. And then a leading indicator is asset health. You're targeting 90% of your total asset base that has condition monitoring inspection across all of your technologies in place, 90% to be healthy, no identified defects as a target. And in this example, 92.4% asset health. Leading indicator, what you can expect from a reliability performance of your asset base moving forward. Next slide, please. So the proactive workflow model, again, this is a best practice. The gold standard for what a maintenance strategy and execution of that maintenance strategy would look like. And it starts with, on the right-hand side in the green, the foundational elements that we talked about. Ensuring you have a good asset catalog, criticality analysis, failure mode analysis on your assets, and then a well-defined equipment maintenance plan. From there, a spare parts optimization strategy is also a key component of your overall asset management strategy. But you have to plan and execute your maintenance strategy, as already mentioned. So you plan, you schedule, and then on the bottom, in the blue on the bottom right-hand side, that plan and schedule work, you're looking for 15% target of your condition monitoring inspection labor hours applied to actually executing the inspections. And then those inspections are expected to identify failure modes and defects, which would drive 35% of your labor hours for corrective work on a planned and scheduled basis. Going back to the bottom in the dark blue box, PM inspections, always going to be part of your maintenance strategy in some way, shape, or form. Again, 15% of your labor hours, targeting and executing your PM work, and then you want that to be driving 15% of your labor hours in corrective work, correcting the identified defects. Again, all of that being in a planned and scheduled fashion. If you add all those numbers up, that means that 80%, that totals 80%. 80% of all the work that's being done is proactive, planned, scheduled, and executed work. The remaining 20% is split with requested work, and then emergency breakdowns. That's what overall active work, and 10% reactive work. That's your emergency breakdowns. 10% remaining for requested work, right? So you should have KPIs in place that enable you to measure your performance against these gold standard targets, right? So there you have it. There you have it. Applying condition monitoring technologies that detect the failure modes in your plant. And I think I'll, at this point, open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Scott, for your presentation and your time here today. Now, we are just up at the top of the hour, and we do have our next webinar coming up. So, Scott, what we're going to do is if anyone does have any questions directly for Scott, please enter them now into the question panel of your screen that you have, and we will make sure we forward all questions right over to Scott so that he can answer for you guys as we do close up. So again, Scott, before we do close anything, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I do not. Thank you. I
Right.
appreciate the opportunity here to present today.
Well, we thank you so much. And one quick question, if anybody would like to reach out to you, is LinkedIn or email a good option?
Absolutely. Either or.
All right. Well, that is awesome.
Either or.
Thank you. And as a special thank you for attending WOW 11, we are pleased to provide you with 50% off your conference pass to the CBM and Reliability Live Training Conferences happening in Mexico in August, in a few weeks in Australia. We're up in November. You can use code WOW50 to reserve your seat to take advantage of this discount. All these events include certification training opportunities, hands-on workshops, and case study sessions. You can visit Mobius Connect Conference to learn more about these live and in-person events. And you'll also find a link to register in a follow-up email after this webinar. And coming up next today in our final presentation of WOW, we do have avoiding mistakes while building your first condition monitoring program, presented by Hassan. That'll be here up just about 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And if you haven't signed up and you would like to, please go to your attendee hub and you will be able to just go ahead and click join the webinar for them. Also, please visit Mobius Connect on LinkedIn, on any social media, so you can stay up to date with all of the latest community happenings that we do have. We are very excited to share with you that we do have WOW 12 fully ready for January 22nd through the 26th. So this is going to be one fun, jam-packed, exciting WOW, just like you've seen here for WOW 11. And if you would like to participate as a speaker, please email our team at info@mobiusconnect.com. And if you are interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate on the industry's live feed and forums on Mobius Connect, you can visit mobiusconnect.com to create your free profile. And again, be sure to follow us on social media. If you have any questions at all or would like a connection to Scott, please email our team at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. Please stay safe, and we will see you all next time.